Good morning, everybody. Tricia, are we in compliance with the Freedom of Information Act?
Yes, sir, we are.
Good. Tricia, would you please make the roll call?
Yes, sir. Mr. Brown?
Here.
Mr. Harper?
Here.
Mr. Ames?
Here.
Mr. Pepper?
Here.
Mr. Lennox?
Here.
Mr. Stanford?
Here.
Mayor McCann?
Here.
All present, sir.
I need a motion now to approve the agenda.
So moved.
Second.
Second. Good. Okay, all those in favor, please raise your right hand. The agenda. Good, thank you very much. We are, Sean, you're going to do this presentation, open this up?
Yes, sir. Thank you. Thanks for warming up the crowd this morning. Hope everyone had a great weekend. First, thanks for your commitment to provide input and explore opportunities to address this important issue of workforce availability. I want to let you know that we heard what you said at your workshop a couple of weeks ago on the 19th. And we are working on a, yep. So, are we good? Everybody hear me?
Yes, Sean, we can. Hang on just 1 second, Sean. Can I ask everybody except for Sean to please mute their microphones? We're getting some really bad feedback. Thank you. Sean, go ahead, try again.
All right, thanks, Krista. Anyway, so I want to let you know we heard what you said at your workshop a couple of weeks ago. We've looked at the strategic plan. We've looked at your input that you provided, and we are working on a full court press to meet your collective expectations going forward. There were several ideas shared by members of council at the last workshop. There was a consistent theme that the town should increase awareness of our recently adopted programs, both the commercial conversion and bonus density program elements, and also to proactively engage experts in the area of workforce housing, including developers and investors. In addition, there was general agreement that we should continue to explore additional regulatory program opportunities. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen and run through just a brief presentation. Can y'all see the presentation on the screen?
Yes, Sean.
All right.
Tell them, Krista.
Sean, you're in, it's viewing your other screen, so it's showing your presentation view.
Okay. Something else here. Sorry for the technical difficulties here. Any better?
We're seeing your main page.
It's going to keep doing that.
Sean, would you like me to go ahead and share it?
Sure, that'd be great, Krista.
Mm-hmm.
Here we go.
Thanks, Krista. If we can go to the second slide. All right, so being consistent with the discussion we had a couple of weeks ago about informing, educating, and reminding folks what we have currently available for workforce housing tools. Council adopted recently 2 regulatory programs to affect positive impact for workforce housing. And this was done before looking at any financial assistance, including dedicating funding and or use of town-owned property, which we'll talk about a little later. Lisa Sturdivant pointed out in the strategic housing plan that these two options were important to the success of the program, but alone would not be as effective without other supplemental program elements. Another critical component to the success of these and other programs is a proactive approach to educate and engage the development community investors. That was also pointed out in the strategic plan as an early action item, that once programs were adopted, that a marketing and engagement strategy be developed to notify the development community of these programs, raise awareness, and test with experts the likelihood of these being successful tools for implementation of workforce housing. Next slide, Krista. As a reminder, the first tool was the commercial reuse policy, or commercial conversion that we call it. For information, this was adopted just 6 months ago in November of 2020. I've heard comments in the community that we've had these programs on the books for a year or so. That's inaccurate. We've only had 6 months of history with this being a regulatory tool that we've had adopted. It does allow for commercial conversion options, but looking forward, we need to develop the marketing recruitment package to engage the development community and experts about this option. We have received several inquiries from various non-residential commercial property owners to convert some of the underperforming stock using this program. And we've also continued to hear about options that look at shared cooking and living facilities with multiple bedroom options, that just like the product that we've seen on Park Lane. I met with another potential redevelopment project developer last week, and that project would potentially replace 50 to 60,000 square feet of underperforming, mostly vacant office space with a mixed-use product. I can't go into too much detail for some confidentiality reasons, but folks are looking at the programs that we have or other opportunities within the code where they can develop and deliver workforce housing options. These two adopted components are 2 of 8 that were identified in the strategic housing workshop, or strategic housing effort and the plan. I'm going to run through the 8 quickly for our information and education. Recommendation 1 was establishing a housing trust. Number 2 was establish a commercial conversion or reuse policy, which we've done. 3 was using town-owned property in some capacity to deliver workforce housing product. 4 was a bonus density program. We have delivered that. 5 was to expand employer assistance programs like down payment assistance. 6 was tax and impact fee rebates. 7 was work with area partners on a home linking or sharing program where workforce could co-use space through connections, through an app or some other business development strategy. And then number 8 was make Hilton Head Island more competitive by lobbying for changes in the qualified allocation plan, important to the low-income housing tax credit component. And I will say that the language in that QAP was modified to expand the distance from our school cluster to 3 miles, and therefore making Hilton Head more competitive for the allocation of low-income housing tax credits in that arena. So currently there are 3 of the 8 recommendations. 2 have been adopted by council, and 1 was an effort in lobbying the state to make Hilton Head more competitive. I just want to make sure we point that out. Krista, next slide. The second tool in the toolkit adopted by council, again, we're relatively new having this at our disposal. It was adopted by council in February 2021, so just a couple months ago. Originally, there was a density bonus program that was drafted that was far more reaching and expansive in the number of zoning districts that it could be applied to. Based on direction from council late last year, staff worked and developed to bring back a more focused strategy that focused on the RM4 district and provided qualifying criteria that projects would have to meet in order to qualify for the bonus density program. So we have started with this with a small area of eligibility. We have talked to some developers about this program. We have had some recent discussion as late as last week about the provision of additional workforce units. They are in the form of mobile homes, but where land could be consolidated and increase the number of units currently provided on the properties from 9 to up to 44. So we have heard that there is some opportunity, in that area. I do want to point out that right now, current market conditions are even less conducive to support these models on their own without other supplemental elements. There are current barriers. We understand the cost of land. We've talked about it many times in the past few years. I also want to point out increased costs right now for building materials and the time frame for delivery of materials. I talked to a contractor over the weekend and some meaningful examples. A sheet of plywood that cost $15 a year or so ago is now $57. A framing package for a house on Defusky of 1,500 square feet used to cost about $15,000. They had an estimate for $63,000 just for the framing package. So the cost of materials is significantly increased. COVID has not helped it, especially with logistics and transportation. Quotes for steel materials for jobs are only good for 48 hours. HVAC equipment is taking 25 to 30 weeks from the time you order it to the time it's available for delivery and installation. Right now, market rate demand and lack of inventory are pushing prices up, accelerating the demand for more product, which is only going to increase costs based on lack of supply. When talking with the growth management director in Bluffton is on pace right now through the first 4 months of the year to deliver 1,000 new residential units for the first time since they've been tracking it. Right now, only 9 of those units are programmed to be affordable. Impact fees and capacity fees are another component. The county is proposing updates to its impact fee ordinance, which would increase impact fees that we've collected historically, and also introducing a new school impact fee with an average cost for a single family unit of around $9,500. Those are fees that were not in place, or currently not in place, but are being proposed, which only will increase the cost of housing across the board. Wanted to point those things out. Those are barriers. Those are real issues and conditions that we need to consider as we outline any program going forward. Chris, the next slide. So there's 2 regulatory options that Town Council has looked to advance. I will say that they've also supported working with regional partners on the Housing Trust Fund. We'll talk a little bit more in detail about that. And the Qualified Action Plan, petitioning the state to be more competitive in that environment. So there's been 3 efforts that have been completed, although we need to do the marketing and engagement and recruitment component to make sure there's an awareness on that. But there were other program options that were outlined through review of our 16 communities that we scanned and presented to Public Planning Committee and was part of the package to council over the past few years. There were homeowner initiatives. There were also some employer-assisted programs to include down payment and closing cost assistance. In that strategic plan, there was a recommendation from Lisa Sturdivant and Associates that the town should take a lead in providing homeowner assistance programs. They had recommended assistance in the range of about $7,500 per applicant which equated to roughly 3% down payment on a home of $250,000. The $250,000 price point seemed right a couple years ago when we talked about this. It's very difficult to think that that price range, it would be difficult to deliver with current cost and demand for materials. But that was part of what was included in the plan. Other options like fee in lieu, options for financial contributions rather than the delivery of workforce housing was an option for bonus density programs. Rather than install workforce housing, a developer could pay into a bank that the money would then be used toward delivering workforce housing program goals. The town does have some home funds. The town was involved, as you recall, we had two former workforce housing programs, the family housing program and the moderate income housing program. And the town did use some home funds, federal funds, for down payment assistance, I think for 10 applicants. That money has been repaid, all but two, but we have money in the home loan in our home program that we need to look at what opportunities there are for use of those funds toward other program goals. I've asked staff to look into that. There was some discussion about inclusionary zoning options. Unfortunately, our state did not pass that as a mandate. But you can have volunteer inclusionary zoning. Like the county's done something similar. There was a notion of voter approved bonds as an opportunity. We'll talk a little bit about the Charleston model in just a second. And then there's some other options that were discussed. If you recall, many of you that were involved, the delivery of new units was an important goal of the program. There was also some discussion about retaining existing units that may be need some repair. Bluffton has a safe and dry program where they provide grants to improve existing homes, to help people stay in the homes. And they also have a small home series with pre-approved options that would make it easier to move through the permitting and approval process. There haven't been a whole lot of applicants for that program, I understand, but it's still another option. And the reason I bring this up, there are a lot of other options that were identified through the work that staff did and the council did with Lisa Sturdivant, our housing consultant. And there are other regulatory components and there are other financial elements that could be considered. Next slide, Krista. I do want to talk briefly about the Regional Housing Trust Fund. So, probably a couple of years ago, council supported working with regional partners to explore what a regional housing trust would look like, what the partnership composition would be, what the funding allocations for each partner would be, what the program goals might be. The county has led this effort, and through them, we worked to select a consultant. That work with a consultant started in earnest around the beginning of the year, and we expect that the recommendations from that consultant would be delivered here in the next couple of months. Right now, the plan is due in June. Hopeful that they can continue to meet that time frame, and we'll continue to push that they get the project completed and recommendations shared with the SoLoco board, and then each participating jurisdictions, councils or approval bodies. And as I mentioned, they will include recommendations on the proposed organizational structure, the program goals, and the funding allocation recommendations for each group. Chris, the next slide. There was some discussion and input from council at the last meeting about potential funding opportunities for workforce housing or housing program elements. The town has some capacity through different means to allocate funding toward different programs and goals. From an operational standpoint, the town can make operational changes, which could include increasing millage or decreasing services and expenses, which would open up that funding for alternate uses, including workforce housing if desired. The town does have reserves that could potentially be utilized for this purpose. Competitive grants and earmarks. I want to remind council that the town accepted the entitlement designation through HUD and the CDBG program. So we're fortunate to receive a dedicated amount of funding each year from HUD through the CDBG program, and we've used it for various items. Most recently for COVID relief. We have a program in next year's CIP for Patterson Park on Marshland Road using CDBG funds. We've used it for the benefit of the Boys and Girls Club. We did pave a couple of roads early in the program. But because we've accepted the entitlement program, we're not eligible for the competitive non-entitlement grant allocation. We could use the roughly $200,000 a year toward housing efforts. But when we discussed this with council early on, didn't feel that was a significant enough of amount to make an impact, while we had dirt roads and other things that we thought we could implement at a much more rapid pace. Talking about millage, I do want to point out, I checked with our finance director, we do have a total of 0.72 and look back millage from the past few years. I think today's value of a mill is roughly $917,000. And so an increase, taking advantage of that look back millage of 0.72 would result in around $660,000 in annual recurring funds. There was an Expedia lawsuit settlement that the town participated in a couple years ago, I believe. And when the town was awarded the settlement amount, council at that time asked to accept it and then put the money aside for future determination. I understand that funding amount is around $500,000 that the town holds. And then I believe the town manager will talk with council through the budget process about including a funding offset or value that could help assist with workforce housing delivery, whether it's an impact fee, credit, or some other component. I believe he'll talk with you starting as early as tomorrow or through the budget discussion process and workshop. So I do want to point those things out. There are ways to look at funding programs, including workforce housing, and any one of these methods may be appropriate based on your discussion and direction. Next one, Krista. So the last one on the previous slide was bond referendum. It was brought up at the discussion a couple weeks ago. Just a reminder that during the discussion with PPC and council over the past couple of years, we did have a panel discussion. We brought in experts from 5 communities throughout the country. One of those was Josh Martin, who was with the city of Charleston at the time. He participated in that panel presentation with PPC and shared the following information. The city of Charleston had passed a referendum in November of 2017 in the amount of around $20 million, and Josh outlined very thoroughly with that discussion about what the program was, what the terms were, and what the plan was for the delivery of workforce units. And so this is another approach. This is a community here in South Carolina, just up the road, that used a referendum model in delivery of workforce units. Next slide, Krista. Excuse me. So I'm trying to cover briefly a little bit about all the recommendations that were included in the report. And so those were other funding options. We talked about other regulatory program elements. Town-owned property, right? It was number 3, I think, in the recommendations. We've batted this back and forth for many years, going back to the first program in the late 90s. We've talked about some difficulty in determining the applicability of uses on each town-owned property because of funding source restrictions, restrictive covenants, community expectations and other things. So staff's been engaged in a deep dive of the town-owned property files to develop a couple things. One, an accurate database, and two, an interactive dashboard of all of your land assets. As I mentioned, you're aware that property may be restricted based on funding source used to acquire the property. And so one of the overriding goals of this current effort is to understand the impact of funding source for each property and to represent graphically those properties that may be used for various goals identified by town council. I see this as a significant tool, not just for identifying properties to use toward workforce housing, but other town council goals that they may have. We currently went out for an RFP with town-owned property to develop some options for property on Palmetto Bay Road. And as we go forward, I think this is going to be a critical tool to have where we can represent to you very quickly, filter this information based on funding source, based on program goal and other things to have this and share. Also make this available outward facing so that anyone can utilize the information. We're targeting July to have this important work effort completed. Would also like to look at this mapping opportunity to overlap with the opportunity zone. That was brought up a couple of weeks ago. But identifying properties that are within that zone that would be suited that would be eligible for the bonus density program, identify those that are ripe for commercial conversion and can take advantage of that program, and also include overlap, use the qualified allocation plan for the low-income housing tax credit program as an overlap too with the town-owned property and properties in general on Hilton Head that could take advantage. And so if you had a heat map that showed properties that would be competitive from a low-income housing tax credit, it would make it much easier for developers to understand that and for us to market and engage the community that that's an option for those properties. Next slide, Crystal. And I'm getting close to the end, so thanks for your patience. At the last meeting, there was some discussion about a communication strategy. Again, over the weekend, I read through the entire strategic housing plan again, and this was one critical component that was recommended, was not only should you adopt different program elements, but you should engage in discussion with the experts and those that deliver these type of products. And so we have started to put together a communication strategy to educate those about the programs that have been adopted. We'll look to recruit developers and investors by identifying a target group, look at hosting many conferences, virtual conferences, use media outlet opportunities to deliver the message, use social media as well. We'll talk about group presentations and then developing collateral material that would be helpful to summarize the programs that are available. And I think partnering with those overlay maps and those graphics, I think will be important to help the development community understand opportunities here on the island. Krista, next slide, last slide. So I kind of want to sum up before council discussion, but if we look at next steps going forward, I think that marketing and communication plan are going to be critical to make people aware of what we currently have available about the effort with the Regional Housing Trust, about being more competitive to the low-income housing tax credit. So proactively engaging the developers and investors is important. We also want to continue discussion with experts. Some developers have told us straight up that the bonus density program isn't going to work. But I've heard from others that if they could get to 40 units on a piece of property, they can make it work if it's in the low-income housing tax credit arena. So there's some opportunities there, continue discussion with experts. We'll continue to push the regional effort to get answers on the Regional Housing Trust. We're hopeful to have that in June, and then bring that forward to council to share the information learned and have council consider what's recommended in that report. We'll continue to log and report on inquiries that we receive for either the 2 programs that are on the books or any other opportunities that we may be presented with. And then finally refine and complete the town-owned property dashboard that I walked through just a couple slides ago. I think that's going to be critically important to have that database and that dashboard available so that we understand at a much more rapid pace and can share with you those that could be opportunities for workforce housing or other initiatives should you choose. That completes what I put together from our presentation, the information I wanted to share with you. Would like to hear your input and help direct where we should be going in the future.
Well, I usually go last, but I'll go first today. First of all, excellent presentation, Sean. Really, really good. And the map you had there, I hope we can distribute that to council as soon as possible. I've got requests for that as late as this morning. I think we should work backwards. I think we should develop a business plan as to what we want to do. Right now, we're just picking off pieces again and do a piece here and a piece here. I mean, I don't think the whole council is convinced that we should do one type or another type of affordable housing. I don't think the whole council is convinced that we ought to do any building at all, as opposed to salaries, education, and transportation. I think if we build a business plan as to what we really need, what we don't really need, and work our way backwards, we can have a better product when we're finished than before. Now, I'd like to go around. What's your comments on that, Bill?
Well, I think, was it in February, we approved what I would call 3 tactical initiatives. One was the repurposing of commercial. The other was increase of bonus density in particular areas. And then the third was to make a determination on what action will take place based upon the land trust study, which should be coming to fruition in June of this year. It has been my sense that these 3 directions, the first 2 in particular, have not been promulgated at the level that we normally would like to do. And there's an excuse for everything, I think, and sometimes excuses are good and sometimes they're not. In this case, I think they were good. We were in transition. We were looking for a new town manager. We were fortunate to find somebody. And we have then a new team being formed here at Town Council. So this is not a criticism, but I don't think the kind of effort we normally would give to something like this took place. So I would like to see that exhausted. I'd like to see a lot of energy behind it. I'd like to see a lot of communication. I'd like to see a lot of proactive versus just reacting to people knocking on our door. I would like to be proactive and go to the development community and get the word out. I think that would be important. And then added to that, I would view this as you're possibly starting a new company. And when you think about starting a new company, you really are talking about a very well developed, and I didn't know, Mayor, you were going to use business plan, but that's what I would use, a very well developed business plan as to what the need is, what the opportunities are, what the rewards may be, and what the price may be. And then look at the capital call, and then look at the sources of capital, what you would normally do developing a business plan. And then I think in a very organized way, we could say what direction we're going to follow and do it. And I think this type of methodical approach creates a strong platform for the community. So those are my quick thoughts.
Mr. Lennox?
Oh, excuse me, one more. And while you're doing all this, after you develop this overall business plan, make a decision what you'd like to do. And if we don't have the money to do it, based on existing sources, then I wholeheartedly would go out to the public with a communication, call it a referendum, and say, here's what we want your, without an endorsement and editorial comment, here's a direction that we could go. You decide yourself the pluses and minuses and whether you want to support it.
Mr. Lennox?
Thanks, Sean. Sean, I'm encouraged that we do have activity from property owners for reuse and density bonuses. I'm encouraged by that dialogue and would like to hear very much what hurdles or obstacles you or the property owners encounter, and try to find a way to deal with those as we go forward. How plugged in are developers to the things that we are trying to do or have done, Sean?
So I would say that there's a general awareness of the programs that we've adopted. Not enough education has been done to understand the different nuances. Right now, I think because of some of the other factors and impediments that I've identified, they understand on the surface that bonus density is probably not going to get them there alone. And so I think they've been reluctant to pursue without some other discussion or other supplemental options. I think we need to continue to market and recruit and educate on the programs that we do have available going forward. So I would say it's kind of a general awareness, but not a detailed awareness.
Okay, and I get that. There's not much we can do about the price of lumber. Hopefully that spike will return to what's more normal. Do you have any idea, Sean, how much money we have in the loan fund?
I'm sorry, I keep muting myself here. The home loan funds that the town received several years ago, I think we have somewhere in the range between $70,000 and $80,000. And I can get that information and share with the town manager, distribute to council.
All right. And my last question, Sean, is of the 2,000 acres that the town owns, do you have an idea as to how many of those acres are unrestricted use?
We did look at using general filters a while ago. Those 2,000 acres, a significant portion are development rights off island, the old Ulmer tract. And I think it's 600 or 700 acres, so that reduces it by a significant amount very early on. But of the 1,300 or 1,400 remaining acres, we had looked at about 120, 150 acres that, without a further deep dive, which we're underway with now, had potential to be used. I would be surprised if it remains that high. I think it would be somewhere less than that. But that was, so about 10%. About 10% of the property that wasn't part of the Ulmer development rights is kind of where we landed previously.
Okay. John, that's it. I'm encouraged by the dialogue that Sean is having with property owners, and I'd be interested to know more about that and what obstacles or objections we run into.
Mr. Glenn? Glenn?
Thank you. Trying to turn on the microphone here. Sean, this was an excellent presentation. You have summarized things, I think, very well, and that is all very useful. Mr. Mayor, I agree with you, your initial comments about the need for us to reduce this to a business plan to achieve a certain goal. We can look at it now as maybe kind of haphazard. We're kind of all over the place. And it needs to be focused. And I think that is a challenge for Sean and Mark and the rest of the staff to develop that and have council adopt that as a business plan to achieve these goals. in terms of the review of the various funding sources that are there, that is useful, but they seem fairly small. I am very dubious of a referendum, a tax referendum on this island to provide workforce housing because of the immediate screams of outrage that I've heard from citizens. I haven't heard a single citizen that favors that, but I've heard from many who are very opposed to it. And so I think we need to be very cautious about going there. I realize we have a recovering economy, and we have a low tax base or low tax rate environment here, but people protect that and they're opposed to increasing their taxes unless they see a direct benefit. And it may be that the business plan would in fact tend to show what that public benefit is. One of the funding sources that intrigues me about this is the real estate transfer fee. The real estate transfer fee, as it's crafted now, I don't believe could be used for this purpose. We've talked about possibly looking at amending that statute to extend its life because it's been a valuable tool to the island community, and it's generated funds from those who are coming here, and that just makes so much sense. So I think we should look at that particular ordinance, and as I say, my recollection, I haven't read it now in a period of time, but my recollection is it's not focused on those uses now, and so I would like to know if it's possible to amend it for those purposes. I look forward to your mapping. I think mapping the town-owned land is going to really educate us about what is available and what we can use it for, because I think ultimately the way we will be successful in this is with public-private partnerships, and the public part of that, I think, could largely be in the use of town-owned land, probably through a long-term lease rather than a sale, certainly not a donation of that land, but we can find good creative ways to do that. Going back on the referendum, I remember seeing the presentations from the other communities that were given to the PPC. Charleston is the closest and one of the most successful, and Charleston was able to pass a referendum that generated bond funds that are used for these purposes. I think there's enough difference between the attitudes and voter base between Charleston and Hilton Head that while that was successful there, I'm very doubtful about its potential success here. The idea of the homeowner assistance, I'm not really up to speed at all about what the existing town properties are and what they might be, what might be available to us. But so I think there should be a report on that, so that possibly that will be one of the tools in the quiver for us to use. The Regional Trust Fund is another thing I'm dubious about because of attitudes of the region towards our community, but I'm certainly willing to continue to see it being explored. Sean, is the consultant that you referenced to is working on that, is that consultant retained solely by the county or is it by the town and county?
All the partners agreed to contribute in funding the effort. The county is the lead managing agency on the contract, but there is a policy committee with representatives. Jennifer Ray and I serve on that policy committee that's working through the process with the other partners.
Thank you. That's helpful, and it's always a good thing to know. I just lost my train of thought here. I'll pass for now. Someone interrupted me here. Thank you. Great report, Sean.
Glenn, I've asked Mark to talk to the Real Estate Association about renewing and extending and reclarifying the money that we get on a real estate transfer fee. So Mark's gonna take that project on. Tammy? I just asked you.
Well, thank you. And Sean, thank you for all that information. It was really helpful. It answered some of my questions on my list for discussion, and it created some additional ones. I want to go back, as others have, to Mayor's initial comment with regard to a business plan. I think that there's nowhere else to start other than making sure that as you enter that process of creating a business plan, that you have a goal. And your goal has to be set, and we all have to agree on what that goal is. I know globally the goal is to provide for island areas for the workforce that is affordable. A couple of things on that is, do we know, even if you go back to the housing report, there was a recommendation of 200 units per year. We don't have, in my opinion, a statistical reading of what number we actually are dealing with who want to live on the island. We also, in our goal, have to be cognizant of the fact that this is not a Hilton Head Island issue. This is a nationwide issue. And are we, with taking into account the housing report or any other report, ever going to come to a place where you can meet a goal of providing sufficient, in somebody else's terms, housing on the island for workforce? So that in and itself is a question that I don't think we've talked about. And that has to be part of the discussion when you're creating the goal. Is our goal what the housing report put in front of us? Do we all agree on that? Do we have some other goal? But we need to know what our goal is before we can create a business plan that'll work. In terms of the goal, again, sticking with that business plan, what I yet to hear is a piece of this puzzle that includes transportation opportunities so that people can live where they choose to live if they don't want to live on Hilton Head, whether it's the other side of the bridge in Bluffton or Oakety or Hardyville, wherever they want to live, and then have an easier commute onto the island. So where is that property that we could entertain purchase of and development of a transportation hub that folks can utilize to come across the bridge, which does multitude of benefits for us, gets cars off the road, helps people live where they want to live, and come across the island bridge safely. So I still haven't heard anything about that. So I would love to hear that additional information on transportation. In terms of funding for that, hate to be this person, but our trolley system that we do spend money on is not widely used. I'm not sure how the statistics will play out when they're presented to us in hopefully the near future, but just by anecdotal information and observation, it doesn't necessarily, in my mind at this point, seem as though those funds are being well spent. And perhaps they could be better spent in providing the different type of transportation to accommodate workforce on the island. So those are a couple of things that I wanted to talk about. And I'm going to just skip back to my notes and make sure that I'm not missing a lot of what's important. I think the referendum idea is way premature. I think, like Glenn does, the trust that we're going to hear more about in the future is likely not going to be benefit Hilton Head in a large way, but in fact, put us in a position where we're contributing to other people's solutions when we have our ours that are in our mind right now. When we look at that map, and Sean, I'm so excited about that because I've been waiting to see that map and to see what's designated and where town land is. I'm still, regardless of what its use is, cognizant of the fact that taxpayer money paid for it. I would want that map to be very prominent and available to the public. Many people buy land and make decisions, especially those of us who live outside the gates, based on what we see. And sometimes what we see is a big, beautiful sign that says preserved, town-owned property, so many acres, and you think you're buying next to something that will stay that way. And in some cases, right, short of zoning changes, which I guess happens periodically, and we all have to deal with in one way or another, they very well may have been bought next to and invested their money in property that could quickly become something other than what they envisioned. And I think that's a piece of the puzzle that when you're making a large purchase, you need to be aware of. Otherwise, it comes back to bite you and you lose money. I think also that our businesses have a role to play in this process. It could go back to that transportation funding, whether or not there is an opportunity for businesses to help pay for their employees or subsidize their employees to easily get on the buses or whatever the case may be, trolley, to come to work. Maybe that's something that's available also. Landowners and developers, it's interesting to me, want the opportunities to increase density and to build on the island and maintain their income level from those projects that they develop and put the whatever shortfall there is on the backs of the town and our residents. And I think that to me, that warrants more discussion. And in saying that, I'll go back and I'll let somebody else talk, not that I don't have some other things that are likely to come up, but the efforts that we've put into place so far, number 2 and 4, as you went through the items, haven't, in my mind, and I think you expressed it well to make me feel even more confident, haven't necessarily been given an opportunity to work, right? So there's an awful lot of what you discussed and you presented that needs to be implemented to see whether or not what we already have is feasible, is put us in a position where we can say that we've made some headway into this condition that's nationally a struggle for everyone that we've not yet clearly defined as a goal and planned for. So all of that has to come together. The outreach that you're talking about in terms of it has to be done before we can take another step forward. Or as it is, as someone has already said, piecemealing, whatever is flying by at the time. Let's do this, let's do that, and the other thing. In the end, you've really accomplished nothing, but more likely created situations that untenable in the long run, and also don't work together as part of the whole puzzle. So I'd encourage us to create a goal, make sure that our business plan meets that goal, include items that we haven't included in the past, look for opportunities of existing monies that don't cut back on services or anything that we already have planned for, does not raise our millage. This is not a community where I'm at all interested in raising the taxes for our residents. We are a retirement community to a large extent, with people for a large extent living off of fixed incomes. And every time I look at a dollar, it's important in my pocket and how it gets spent. And I'm sure that that's the same for most everyone else. So I'm going to leave that there for right now. And thank you, Mayor, for the opportunity to express my thoughts.
We're off mute.
Mr. Brown?
Yes, good morning. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. The discussion so far has provoked a lot of thought for me. So I've got some questions, not all for staff, actually some for us as council also. I guess the first one is for staff. And let me start with saying, Mr. Mayor, I agree with your approach of a well-defined business plan that is put in front of the policymakers to adopt as far as a path forward. And I also add that I agree with Councilwoman Becker and Councilman Stanford so far with not being in favor of a referendum. I understand when we're starting a new business, we do have to find capital, but I want to make sure that we are exploring all other options of new money before we go down that road. So my first question is the other component of a business plan, and if you're going out to achieve a goal, is you may have to engage with some partners. So I'm curious to know what has been our engagement, or what we see as our engagement moving forward with the chamber.
Unfortunately, Alex, I don't think the chamber has done much towards helping us. I think we should make another run at them to see what part they're going to play in this. If they're not going to play a major part, then we have to go at the chamber members that are major people, like Birdwell, like Mark Sen, who built the Shelter Cove. We have to do the chamber's work if they're not going to do it. But we just can't wait for them to do something, Alex, unfortunately.
Yeah, I'd like to, I'm sorry, go ahead.
I'd like to add, aside from the chamber, what we need to do, and this is really based upon Councilman Lennox's comments at the last workshop. Sean and I have compared some notes. Just really go out with a letter of intent to the development community. So release a position. It's more or less a recruitment statement, but it's a letter of intent, much in the same way we would look for a consultant to help us with something. Let's release something to the development community to reiterate, A, the policy that is in place, and B, that as they are interested here, that they're going to be received with open arms. I really enjoyed Sean's presentation today, and really how where Sean's mind is wrapping around, even going through Hilton Head Island and assessing the opportunity zone, the qualifiers for the low-income housing tax credits, and actually doing that preliminary analysis first, adding all of that together through the letter of intent, so to speak, to the development community, so that we're doing the hard work on the front end, or at least we're working with them on the front end. So to answer your question, Councilman Brown, and follow up with the mayor, I'll definitely talk with the chamber, but I think a lot of that work can be from us straight to the development community. Of course, the chamber can have a role in the communication and the messaging, but I think it's ours to lead.
Not to disagree with that, I agree with you. Let's stay on business plan.
Yes.
The interim pieces are good, so let's stay on the business plan.
Yes, sir.
John, don't forget about all the work the chamber has done through its workforce coalition and the task force and subcommittees that they've sent up. They've spent a lot of time, and they're fully invested in this, Alex. To the extent that we can use them more or more effectively, that may be the case, but they are probably ahead of us in terms of developing a workforce strategy.
Yeah, thank you, Councilman Lennox. That's where I was going. I'd like for us to re-engage in that discussion, fold them in to this business plan as we're mentioning it, I understand that there's even going to be some lobbying efforts on some hospitality tax or a tax that I think is a grand opportunity for us when we're looking for new money to capitalize this effort. So I strongly agree with Councilman Lennox that the chamber needs to be folded in here. My next question, we've used the word developer a lot. Do we have a definition of developer?
Just in general terms, Alex, I use the term developer, anyone that's implementing a unit or more of workforce housing as it relates to this initiative. And maybe that term is used a little too loosely, but that's what I see. Anyone providing workforce, delivery of workforce housing as it relates to this program, I would call a developer or an investor in the project and program.
Okay, well, thank you for that, Sean. So where I was going with that is, as we develop this business plan, I'm not necessarily looking for the definition for a developer, but what I am looking for is who is the broker, so to speak. Who is the person that is going to be interfacing with a developer, quote unquote, moving forward. All right. And I don't need the answer to that right now, but I think that's really important because we have to understand that, eating this elephant one bite at a time is going to help us get to the finish line. And some bites may be bigger than others, but I don't want to exclude anyone that is willing to support our effort with chipping away at our housing challenge here.
Time for the next item.
David Ames will speak for a while, so what's the next item?
Was somebody saying something? Was there a response to what I was saying?
Oh, Bill asked me how much more time do we have?
Oh, okay. My next question is going back to funding sources, and I understand that there's money being pushed down federally to support infrastructure and transportation. Councilwoman Becker has mentioned transportation also. I guess this question is more towards Councilman Lennox. Who I see is not, I can't see him anymore. But I'll ask the question anyway. I'm just curious to know if there's some opportunity with some of the federal money being pushed down and the local banks leveraging or matching those funds right here on Hilton Head, maybe in an attempt to help fill this gap that we keep talking about. And they in turn get credits towards their Community Reinvestment Act responsibilities. But Mr. Lennox is not available. That doesn't have to be answered today, but I think that that's something that we need to consider as we chase after new money.
Yeah, Alex, just briefly, we're looking at all the funding opportunities that are available. We'll be developing some funding solutions that could be potentially applied for this using state and federal funds. Also funding solutions for other initiatives that council may deem appropriate going forward. So we've got staff, Marcy Benson's reviewed some of the more recent stimulus and other opportunities of funding that's coming through, and we'll share that with the town manager and council here in the near future.
Okay, this is nowhere near my wheelhouse, Sean, but I think I need to give this quick example so everybody understands where I'm going with this. When a bank is deciding to lend or not to lend, the income of the project is definitely going to be a very important part of the equation, okay? And if we are trying to achieve affordable housing, that income may not be the same as what they would typically look at. So if the federal funds were to somehow be used to fill that gap, and then we force our local banks' hands to make sure that they do invest in these type of projects so that they then get credit for the Community Reinvestment Act, okay? That's where I was going with that. And that may get us to a better place when it comes to the mobile homes also, because mobile homes, there's a bank involved in that purchase. It's just not a local bank. It's a bank that has been, has conditioned itself to deal with that, and our local banks have not. So if we could somehow get to a point where we're filling that gap between stick-built and manufactured home, I think we'll be in a better place long term. And just a few other things that I don't necessarily need responses to, but as we're developing this business plan, I'd like to read them all off. This is a strong word, but maybe I should put the word modified in front of it. Modified moratorium on new development. This gets back to our capacity question. I'm not quite sure if we have done that calculation of how much room we have left. And then the question needs to become, of that room that we have left, how much of it do we need it to be affordable? I've already mentioned the lobbying efforts. The tax impact fee abatement, I think that definitely needs to be a part of the equation. I mean, we can't have the county raising it and we trying to accomplish affordable on this side. The town budget, I know we're going to talk about that on tomorrow, but I just want to propose that right now I think we got a note that around 43% of our town staff is living on Hilton Head. I've mentioned before that potentially we should include a stipend in our budget to get us to a better place. But setting a goal, what we want to reach, I think is important. 43% is less than half. I think we can do much better than that. I'd like to be closer to 100% than I am closer to 0%. The town-owned property. So I think Sean said there was like 10% of that, 100 to 150 acres that it didn't have restrictions. But I'm curious to know if any of those acres currently fall within an area that could take advantage of the conversion from commercial or the bonus density.
Well, it's a great question, Alex. As I mentioned, overlapping the effort from the town-owned property mapping or dashboard with the QAP for low-income housing tax credit and opportunity zone. That's something we're actively including as part of our goals with this effort, and hopefully have that portion to you sooner rather than later with the delivery of the whole information.
Good deal. Yeah, well, I guess I'm speaking more of a statement to our components of this business plan, the details of it. If we have town-owned property and it does not, and it is currently available without restrictions, then in my mind, it should be carrying the current regulations that we have that are giving incentives for workforce housing, is where I was going. Okay, those are my comments, Mr. Mayor. Thank you.
Put back on mute. Oh, off mute. Okay. Mr. Ames.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. A couple of questions. Do we know what the impact fees are for development at this time, Sean, and what they will become if the county initiative passes in November?
Yes, sir, and we could make what the proposed changes by the county, what those changes are, and we can relay those to council. for
Order of
information.
magnitude right now, 6,000-7,000 plus.
Well, I know the school impact fee, just, 9,500, it's a new fee. There are a couple things. I think Park was going down, for us, but transportation was going up. I'm reluctant to give you a number, but say 20 to 50% increase.
That's fine for now. Did Charleston have the human resource capacity when it went to referendum for $20 million? Do you have any idea how structured they were?
What does that mean?
Did they have a business plan in place for this? How far along were they? Do you have any idea?
Yeah, we can reach out to see. I think we asked when they had the panel discussion how many staff were dedicated for the provision of just workforce housing. And I can't remember the number, but I want to say 10. 10 seemed right, but we can confirm that.
I'd be interested in that answer. There's been several comments related to discussions with developers. And there's a question of whether or not the bonus density and conversion are going to be enough for a developer to participate. It is my strong opinion that they will not be. They need additional juice, but I would recommend that as a part of the discussion with developers, we actually create pro formas or feasibility studies so that we get a confirmation of reality and we can put that conversation to bed. I agree with what Tammy said, that before you can create a business plan, you need a goal, a purpose, you need a mission, you need the commitment on the part of council that this is an issue that is worth creating a business plan for, and continue moving down that track if that commitment is made. There is also the continued conversation about how many people want to live on the island and how many people want to live off the island, and whether or not transportation is a viable alternative. If you consider today there are about 24,000 employees working on the island in any given day, 16,000 approximately are commuting to the island. If you said a third of those are in their trucks and vans for business, and a third of them don't want to live on the island, we still come up with a number a little bit north of 5,000 who, if given the opportunity, would live on the island. I don't have the exact numbers at this point, and I'd have called Mary Lou Franzoni to find out how many buses come to the island every morning, how many employees are actually being transported to the island today. My guess is that it's probably in the order of magnitude of 500 to 1,000, but I think we should get that number. In other words, a fraction of the numbers that would need to be transported. So my conclusion is that for practical reasons and for building community, we need to have a viable goal of producing workforce affordable housing, decent housing on the island. In Mayor Solka's comments at the State of the Region the other day, she said very clearly, we, all municipalities in our region, have a responsibility to address workforce housing. My comment is that the town of Hilton Head cannot turn its back on this responsibility to the regional workforce challenge nor can it ignore the consequences to the island's economy and quality of life if it remains on the sidelines. And what we need is a commitment on the part of council that those things are part of the business plan. But before we can put together that business plan, I think we have to ask the following questions and agree on the answers. Can we agree who we are talking about? Your pharmacist, the nurse and receptionist at your doctor's office, your child's special teacher, members of fire rescue, all of the people at town hall, your favorite restaurant server, a coach or mentor, a USCB faculty member. We are talking about all these people we depend on and interact with every day. They should have the opportunity to live in the community they serve. Another question. Do we have a workforce housing crisis? I don't think we as a council have ever really given the public an answer to that. 57% of the town staff don't live on the island, and that includes our first responders. Businesses are being forced to limit hours of service. Some are even closing. And things are only going to get worse with off-island growth. Can the cost versus revenue gap be filled without some kind of public funding? The gap can be as large as 30%. I'm going to adjust that upward based on what Sean said. It's probably 35% now. Public support is needed to ensure the quality of construction and maintenance so important to the island's reputation. If we participate, we have leverage for the design and aesthetics of the project. And I think we've mentioned this morning, there are many forms of public support. Another question. Can we agree there is a limit to the capacity of the island infrastructure to accommodate our growing population? And Alex brought this up, and appropriately so. There's an obvious limit to our road capacity and the environment if we are to maintain our quality of life and valued reputation. The majority of residents who were surveyed in the Vision Project wanted the island population to be limited to less than 50%. Therefore, should we be reserving capacity for essential workers who provide resident health, safety, welfare, education, and contribute to the island's economy? I think that in a workshop, it's a group of people coming together to discuss and presumably move to consensus. And although I think that a business plan sounds like a rational point of departure, I think the council first has to agree on the questions and the answers that I provided. Thank you, Mayor. That's all I'll say today.
Mr. Langell, any comments?
Well, not necessarily. The one thing that I think we have that is extremely beneficial, and I reminded myself to review it, is back in late 2019, the Town of Hilton Head Island Council adopted this workforce housing strategic plan. A lot of what I will work with Sean to do is extract those elements out of that strategic plan, and it's very well done. It has a lot of good background information in terms of why, not just what. We'll take this and we'll convert this strategic plan into that business plan. Councilman Ames, I've heard those questions that you just asked. They're good questions to answer because that will drive the business plan. Over the last two workshops, I think that what's helped staff, and I can speak for Sean and others, is we're starting to wrap our minds around exactly what we're doing. We will take the lead and we will put the business plan together and also get the word out to the developer, right? The builder, the developer, the financer, that community. And we just need a little bit of time to catch up with this and bring it back before you.
Just let me,
Yes, sir.
make a closing comment here. I think the business plan should be moderated, controlled by some professionals from the outside. I think the business plan should be a mixture of council members and developers on the island, like Mark Sen, Steve Birdwell, and those people that are over, right? And the town staff. But I think we should involve those parties, both the professionals and the council members and the staff and the people that have put money into this island and why they put it in and what they need for the future to put more money back into this island. So I'd like, over next week, you and me will talk about how to develop that along the way. But the council should be involved as well as the staff, as well as the current business owners here and some professionals, whatever it needs.
Yes, sir.
Okay?
Yes, sir.
Can I just jump in with one aspect that hasn't been touched on?
Sure.
Okay, so really quickly, one of the aspects that we haven't touched on is the humanity of what we're doing. In many regards, a lot of what we talk about with regard to workforce housing are micro units, small places, rentals, mobile home situations, where, in my mind, if what we want, as David has aptly described as our workforce, is for those folks to be able to come onto the island, affordably live here, and gain for themselves so that they can move further into our community, create some equity in their lives, get into a different type of housing situation, become part of the schools, become part of our businesses, become part of our community through commissions and committees and council and mayor, possibly many of them, right? We want all of that. We want these folks who are our workforce, not just to come onto the island and clean the dirt out of our corners, cut our grass, make sure that our laundry gets picked up, and all the rest. That's not all we want these people to do. We want these folks who we're trying to get onto the island to become part of our community, to build a life here on Hilton Head Island, and to give back. And one way, in my mind, that I think that happens is through organizations like Habitat for Humanity, something along those lines. Perhaps if you wanted to convince me of a way that town-owned property could be utilized, it is by finding a way to collaborate, to give folks an opportunity to buy into our community. So much gets developed, and I'm speaking to people who understand this, right? So much happens when you own something. There's all the self-confidence, the respect for your community, the development of character, the equity that comes along with that. And in the end, when you're in that position, you have a few extra dollars that you put in your pocket and can move into something else, opening opportunity for others. So what I didn't hear in all of these discussions is that type of development. And I think that we would really be short-sighted not to understand that what we're trying to build is not just workforce housing, but if we're trying to build community, if that's part of this goal, then we need to provide opportunities for people to really establish themselves on the land in Hilton Head Island and have growth opportunities. And so that was something that I think we discussed. The 43% of folks who don't live on the island, could very well be by choice. And in no way, shape, or form do I want to be in a position where I am part of a team that tells folks where they have to live. If we have people who work for our town but would prefer to live elsewhere, then by gosh, that's what they have every right to do. And I'm not saying that. That is just true and factual. And so I don't think we should ever be in a position where we are mandating where people live or trying to do anything other than encourage people to create the life that they want for themselves. So I just wanted to stay on top of that one from my side of thinking with regard. Tom, you mentioned the idea that the chamber has been working on a number of different things, many of which I'm unaware of. I would love the opportunity, perhaps maybe someone, if not I will, reach out to the chamber and see if they have a report of some sort or presentation they'd like to, because they are a partner. And if they're working and we're working, we ought to know what each is doing and see how we can collaborate better on that. The other piece that I wanted to make sure that I'm also clear on is that in my mind, it is not appropriate that every undesignated piece of town land be open and optional for workforce housing. I think there certainly is certain criteria, et cetera, that needs to be a part of that, but not a blanket statement that all town-owned land not previously designated and restricted be open to that. I think that another part of this business plan and first discussions has to be what we've spoken about repeatedly, but never really delved into, and that is the capacity of the island. David has spoken about the capacity with regards to rentals, and a portion of those rentals being only a portion of those being workforce, which will never catch up what the increased density allows for with regard to people moving onto the island. So it's a never-ending battle, and frankly, I don't think we're going to win this battle anyway. So those are a couple of things that came to mind that I wanted to make sure that I left this meeting having expressed. I think others may be thinking the same thing. I know that in the general population, many agree with my comments. So thank you for giving me that opportunity to wrap up my thoughts.
I want to thank you all very much, and I love when the council all disagrees with each other and comes back to an agreement at the end. We're going to take a 3-minute break now to bring in the DOT. So we'll mute it for 3 minutes. Thank you. Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for the short break. And we off mute, everything?
Yeah, we're off mute.
Okay, we're going to get our second part of our meeting now, a report on 278 corridor, which happens to go from Morse Creek to the end of Sea Pines. Just so we understand the length of the road, the length of the project. And, does staff want to say anything first, Mark?
Yes, Sean will.
Sean will. Yes, Sean. How you been?
Thanks again, Mayor. Switching gears from workforce housing now to the US 278 Gateway Corridor project. Just a brief reminder to you and council and others watching that the town and the county jointly entered into a contract with HDR to do an independent engineering review of the DOT led process with their consultant KCI. They worked with a jointly appointed oversight committee with membership from both Hilton Head Island, Beaufort County, and staff members. We have Jared Fralix on the call from Beaufort County. We have Darren Shoemaker, our staff representative on the oversight committee. But we have Philip Hutcherson and Jeff Dayton with HDR on the call, and I'm going to turn it over to them to present to give you a presentation on their report and findings and recommendations. Philip, it's all yours.
Thank you, Sean. I appreciate it. Thank you, council and mayor and staff for letting us present today. Does Krista have the PowerPoint, or do I need to share that?
Mr. Hutcherson, I can share it if you'd like. I'd prefer that you do.
Okay.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, well, I'll actually have Jeff share his screen if that will work
Philip,
better.
Can you hear me okay? I'll take care of it. Give me 1 second.
Awesome, thank you. So while he's pulling that up, I do want to say we definitely enjoyed working on this project and working with the oversight committee that was appointed and hearing their concerns. And I think they really want this project to be the best that it can possibly be. So we'll start here. And so this is the same, a very similar presentation that we gave to Beaufort County Council last Monday evening. So we'll have the same slides that we had at that presentation. And I'll try to change it a little bit to lean more towards some information that you may be wanting to see. But so we started about a month ago, and we met with the oversight committee and we took comments, and so you'll see these in the next several slides. But we started requesting data from DOT, and as you can see, there's listed on the screen there of the items that we've got, not only from DOT but actually also from their public website. The information was on there. And then following that, our oversight committee meetings started back in January, and they continued every other week through last week. Actually was our last wrap-up meeting. So the next slide. So after receiving the information, we began to listen to their concerns, and we focused on some of the key questions from county council and town council. These are actually in our scope of services. So the first couple of questions were dealing with the growth and the growth rate that DOT had presented to the public, and then safety of vehicles and pedestrians with the different alternatives and the intersection concepts that were put out, and then also looking at additional alternatives that maybe had not been studied at that time. So we go to the next slide. We reviewed the alternatives studied by DOT. We reviewed the growth rate. We reviewed all the crash data that was available, and then as well as any of the available funding to date that is available for the project. So after the analysis of what we had studied to date, we considered the new concepts along 278 from Jenkins Island to Stony Community. Some of those included the free-flowing traffic, grade-separated interchanges, reversible lanes, frontage roads, and some combination of those. We looked at impacts to local neighborhoods in regard to new traffic patterns and trying to minimize the rerouting of new traffic patterns and extended travel times due to the new traffic patterns. as well as property impacts. We took a look at bike and pedestrian safety on 278 in the neighborhoods, as well as the increased volume of bikes that are expected now that the multi-use path will extend all the way across the bridges and into Bluffton. And then we also looked at the character of the road as it relates to the speed of the vehicles, the landscaping, and keeping in the character with the rest of Hilton Head Island. So with all that review and analysis, that is in our report that we have finalized. We still have a couple comments that were made by the Oversight Committee in our last meeting that we will change, but all of these recommendations that we're getting ready to go through are in the report. So while there are a lot of alternatives that were considered for construction, what appears to be most likely and least impactful is the alternative that will widen 278 on the east side of the bridges. So with that, our recommendation focuses on the east side of the proposed bridges. We did look briefly at another concept of adding another entrance onto Hilton Head Island other than the 278 entrance. This was an idea that was brought up by multiple members of the Oversight Committee that is something that is needed in the future, not just for congestion mitigation, but also for emergency use should something happen to 278. Now we understand that there have been discussions about another entrance on the Hilton Head, but we did not see any funding or anything in the long-range plans to date on that additional entrance. So our first recommendation is in regards to the traffic signals along 278. So most of the existing signals have either 4 to 8 phases, which means basically multiple directions of traffic receive green times dedicated to that movement, whether it's a through movement or a side road movement or left turns. And based on our study with the amount of traffic on 278, it will start to back up if a signal is given any more than one additional phase beyond the 278 traffic, or maybe slightly more than that. So therefore, our first recommendation that we move forward with is to utilize 2-phase signals and keeping that traffic moving on 278. So keep in mind that that's not an unusual phasing. It is used in other states. I believe it's also used in South Carolina as a way to help the through traffic move more efficiently. So our next recommendation when we looked at the corridor is we noticed a large number of rear-end accidents and angle crashes. So rear-end accidents typically are a sign of congestion, which should possibly be solved by widening 278 to 6 lanes. But the angle crashes are typically caused by cars making turns, typically left turns. So by utilizing alternative intersections such that you see on the screen there, such as 2-phase signals, we can reduce the conflict points and that way reduce the amount of potential accidents that occur at an intersection. So our next recommendation, based on conversations through the Oversight Committee, we had 6 meetings. There's several key questions that have been asked, but maybe not answered directly by DOT concerning the alternatives and the analysis. And DOT is following the NEPA process right now, and we do expect that these answers will probably be given at the public hearing, but we wanted to make these recommendations that DOT look into these in order to help the public evaluate all the options. So these included providing cost estimates for the alternatives that were looked at. In addition, providing a level of service. Right now, the level of service grade that we use as engineers, and I use this myself, is a A through F scale, which is actually different than your typical grading scale that's normally used in school. Travel time analysis may be a better way to do that, and we've recommended that DOT look into that. It is an analysis that's fairly complex and was outside of what we were able to do on this with this report and analysis. Our next recommendation has to do with the speed limit through the corridor. Right now, the speed limit on the bridges is 55 miles an hour, and then it changes to 50 miles an hour through the Jenkins Island area, and then 45 miles an hour as you get on through Squire Pope and Spanish Wells. So looking at the improvements that are going to be needed and adding bike lanes bike facilities and sidewalks, we feel that a 45 mile an hour speed limit through this area is appropriate, and that's what we're recommending. This is the speed limits don't go too high, especially through an area where there's neighborhoods. So the next recommendation, we looked at bike and pedestrian safety. This is something that's key, as I mentioned, not only for the Stony community, which is now a traditional cultural property, but also for the additional additional volumes that we feel will happen once the multi-use path is extended over to Bluffton. So we looked at the town-owned multi-use paths, and this criteria that we're presenting is very similar to that. I think they're efficient and they work well. So in regards to width of the multi-use path, as regards to distance from the travel lanes, in regards to how to appropriately sign and designate crosswalks and bike crossings. These are items that we included in our recommendations to make sure DOT includes in their preferred alternative moving forward. Our next recommendation has to do with the character of the roadway. This is something that we feel is important through the Jenkins Island and Stony area. And so during our study, the town has put under contract MKSK, and we have been working with them a little bit. We've had some conversations with them, but with regards to landscaping and lighting and pedestrian movements and how this looks as you go through the area, to make sure that vehicles just passing through this area are aware that this is a community and that there are pedestrians to be aware of, and let them know that this is kind of the entrance onto Hilton Head. And lastly, the Oversight Committee brought up some concerns about potential areas that are outside of the 278 right-of-way that could change because of this project. So we have investigated several locations that could be considered to improve traffic, the overall traffic flow in the local communities, which may not be directly related to the project. So some of these locations may be better served by the county or the town taking control if the resources were available. This would allow, if there was additional road, a connector road through a neighborhood, this would allow the local staff, either town or county, to have their engineers design that and maybe make that a little bit more context sensitive to that neighborhood. So with that, just to reiterate, all of those recommendations are in the package, and what I've gone through now is just the recommendations that we have. I think the report was very comprehensive. It covered a lot of subject matter. We went into a lot of information that the Oversight Committee had questions on, and the Oversight Committee did a very, very thorough review of the report, and we tried to address any of their questions in that report. So with that, Sean, that concludes the report that we gave to County Council last week.
Are there any questions from members of the council?
Yeah, right here.
Yes, sir.
Sir, first, thanks for the excellent report. Could you please explain what you mean by utilizing two-phase signals, please?
Mm-hmm. Jeff, do you want to? I can do that. Jeff may be able to explain that slightly better than me.
Sure, I'll do my best. So really what this is saying is that you're just running, again, just a two-phase. So if you're running eastbound on Island in the morning. That's just one phase, and then that would stop one time only for a second phase that would allow another phase, the side street turning traffic. And conversely, again, westbound would kind of operate independently as well. You could run westbound off island, particularly in the afternoon when it's heavy. That would stop the traffic on 278 to allow the side streets out. So again, we're trying to minimize all the different phases with the yellow phases from all the side streets, all red times, and all that type of additional time that's going to be included, because in some of the forecasts and analysis that was provided to us by DOT, I mean, they're looking at like 4,000 vehicles in a peak hour in 2045. So when you have that much additional heavy traffic, anytime that's going to be stopped will be a detriment to the corridor.
So translate, I just want to make sure I'm understanding what you're saying. Going eastbound in the morning, you're approaching Squire Pope Road and you'd like to go left during the high traffic time. That would be eliminated during the high traffic time.
Not necessarily, and you could have in a situation like that where Squire Pope is, where you could allow the left turn, because that is a pretty good left turn coming on island. So you could stop the westbound traffic to allow that, we'll call it left over onto Squire Pope Road. And at the same time that left turn is making, you could run the southbound right turn from Squire Pope as well. So that would only be, let's say 20 seconds, give or take. But if you were trying to make a left turn coming out of the side streets, you would have to go right and do a U-turn and come back down the street again.
Okay. David? David?
Would that only be at rush hour times or 24 hours a day?
No, sir. That would likely be 24 hours a day. Part of what we're showing in this situation would also be, Philip touched on a little bit earlier about a pedestrian refuge, where you would have the pedestrians that would be crossing. They would be crossing kind of in two phases. They'd cross one direction of traffic and then call a traffic signal as well to cross the other side. So that would be at all times of the day, not necessarily in peak times.
Is the queue on taking a left turn going east on 278 during rush hour going left there, the queue can get fairly lengthy behind you, and you really start backing up into fast-moving traffic that will be to the right of you. It just sounds dangerous.
Yeah, understood. I know in some of the analysis that DOT provided definitely showed that. So that's why trying to maximize that time when they can allow that left turn to go on Squire Pope. Or again, another scenario could be where they could run further down and look at Spanish Wells. That was just an option that we had proposed because of, you're right, the left turning traffic is heavy eastbound on 278 to go northbound on Squire Pope.
Glenn?
Thank you. Just trying to get the microphone open here. Thank you for your report. I'll look forward to reading it in detail. We were just discussing the left turn situations at Squire Pope and Spanish Wells. Some of the early discussions we've had with DOT have indicated that there may be a recommendation of no left turn at Squire Pope. Are you saying we still could have a left turn at Squire Pope and be able to achieve a satisfactory flow of traffic?
I'll cover that somewhat. So that whole area sort of works together, all the way from Squire Pope down to Spanish Wells, including Old Wild Horse. So there are some alternative intersections that you could use at each one of those areas. By making the left turn onto or from 278 onto Squire Pope, that's a large amount of traffic. So that would minimize the amount of traffic having to change their current traffic pattern. But there are some ways that you could put those left turns on Old Wild Horse or on Wild Horse, either one of those, that would change the traffic patterns of those vehicles. Or you could have them go to Old Wild Horse and take a U-turn as well and come back. That would reduce conflicts as well.
Yes, we've heard those points of view from the DOT, and I think what I'm looking for is, what is your recommendation for those turning movements on 278, if you have one? And if you don't have one, why not?
Yeah, we focused on a lot of the big picture alternatives in this and kind of narrowed it down to 278. There are multiple ways that you can adjust the signals and the where the intersections work. We do have a two-phase alternative in the report that shows the left turns on Squire Pope as a two-phase signal, and then also a two-phase signal at Spanish Wells. And that signal will include left turns off of the side road. So that is one that we looked at and thought there was a lot of promise with that particular alternative. We actually show a figure in the report with that particular situation of traffic.
Okay, I guess I'll need to see the report in order to understand quite what you're saying.
Mm-hmm.
Totally separate subject matter. I personally am doubtful about the size and the scope of the growth projections for this area. My understanding is that DOT has used data from LATS, which was developed regionally. Regionally, over the last 25 or 30 years, there's been enormous growth on Hilton Head Island. We are approaching, we're having much less growth on the island now. As a matter of fact, there may even be an effort to limit some of the additional growth. And so, is the scope of the project as projected in the alternatives that we've seen truly needed to provide the congestion and safety goals that are stated in your report?
Yeah, I will start with that, and then Jeff, maybe you can chime in. But we did a very comprehensive review of the growth rate, and DOTA put together a technical memorandum showing that. So you are right. The regional model that was run in 2010, their forecasted volumes in 2030 and beyond actually had been met physically out on the road by 2017. So the growth rate was definitely high for that period of time. But the regional model not only takes into account Hilton Head, but there is a lot of growth going on in Bluffton as well right now, and that go on and off the island as well. So for this particular spot on 278, you see that growth rate continues to move up, and the consultant for DOT actually went in and looked at some of the things on Hilton Head, the growth rate that was going on there, the growth rate that was going on Bluffton, and came up with I believe it was a 1.19% growth rate, which that seemed very reasonable on the growth in this area. So it's a little bit higher than what Hilton Head had been experiencing, but less than what Bluffton has been experiencing. Jeff, do you want to follow up on that?
Sure. I mean,
Let me finish with a follow-up, if I could, real quickly. Is that 1.9% growth rate the factor that is being used in this report by the DOT?
That's correct. It's just for clarification, it's 1.19%, so just a shade under 1.2. So to Philip's point, there is a good discussion and write up in the report. So if you haven't seen it, it kind of outlines what we're getting at. But kind of to the previous discussion about the desire for workforce to be in Hilton Head, there is still large demand coming from Bluffton and other places onto island in the morning and conversely off island in the afternoon.
May I?
Okay, we will look for the report. Thank you for your comments and your answers here, gentlemen.
David?
Mayor,
Thank you.
may I?
Yes, David?
Thank you. I'd like to follow up on Glenn's thoughts there. So if Hilton Head's population, which has remained somewhat static over the last 5 years, were not to grow at all, then the expansion of the bridges and throughput is wholly dependent on off-island growth. Is that correct?
Philip, you want me to start this?
Yeah.
And you can. Okay. So somewhat. So there was an analysis that we performed at the request of the Oversight Committee that essentially showed what 2045 traffic would be if there was no additional improvements, and it basically showed grid. They even looked at what the additional or what the original 2018 scenario looked like with no improvements, and that was already at what they'll call level of service E, which was undesirable for what SCDOT was looking for. So even if everything was static and there was no growth, there still needed to be some modifications made to the corridor itself. Bill,
I understand. So there's the objective to improve the current state, but a great emphasis has been placed on off-island growth and the desire for off-islanders to come to the island. Is that correct?
There still is a desire, but again, from what we saw from what the SCDOT had already looked at, that even with the existing data, there is already a need for upgrade of the corridor in terms of some sort of improvement and modifications. The 4 lanes, or 2 in each direction, are really not meeting what's going to be anticipated out there.
Thank you.
Mr. Mayor?
Alex?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Philip, to what degree did the guiding principles that the town of Hilton Head and Beaufort County adopted play into your study and your final report?
So we took those into consideration, and I know the members of the Oversight Committee have looked at the report. Just looking at those oversight those items, I guess. And so the Oversight Committee, I think, took the lead on making sure that was included in the report. Darren Shoemaker, does that make sense?
Yes, Philip.
Yeah.
So is there anything?
So we had, yes. So not only, so we had the town staff on the Oversight Committee as well as the Oversight Committee looking at the report just for those items.
So if I were to take a highlighter through your report, I'd be able to highlight items that were directly a result of us following those guiding principles.
I would hope so, yes.
Okay. I guess I'm somewhat conflicted following up Councilman Stanford and Councilman Ames. It seems as if this whole question of capacity and some degree level of service is not necessarily protecting the quality of life or improving the quality of life for those on Hilton Head, but more so for our visitors. And I know that guiding principle number 1 speaks the exact opposite. You mentioned that there was some discussion of the additional entrance onto Hilton Head outside of current 278. And I can appreciate your request of SCDOT to provide us with an additional cost analysis of all of the reasonable alternatives. But as I looked at your report, I seem to remember that there was some numbers associated with new entrance or even a direct connection to Cross Island in your report. Is that correct?
Yeah, so that is, I guess, what we consider outside of the project as it was described. So adding an additional entrance onto Hilton Head would be considered a different study or different analysis that would need to take place on those impacts. So we did try to look at a high level cost item for that, just knowing how long the bridges would need to be, approximate impacts to areas, what an interchange near the Cross Island connector would probably cost. And so we tried to put a cost range in there, but that is really a different project per se.
Yeah, I understand the extent of it. I'm trying to get the numbers out of you at this point. That high level number that you are describing, can you say that out loud versus the potential cost of what we're looking at currently?
Yeah, I think so. I think that's in the report. So we are looking at, so one of the options was about twice as much, so around 450 to 550 million. And then we were looking at, for the longer option, 700 to 800 million dollars for that.
Okay, thank you.
So 2 or 3 times the amount that is anticipated for this project.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
The mention of the areas, I guess, outside of the corridor, there was a listing there of, I'm describing them as side streets, Squire Pope, Spanish Wells, and so on. And that those were outside of this scope, but that the town or the county should take responsibility in any improvements there. I guess I'm somewhat confused as you deliver the recommendations. If one of the recommendations is to have what you described as two-phase signals, I guess in layman's terms, I understand that as more of limitation of left turns. That in itself would affect traffic patterns on those side streets. So I guess as I'm reading this report, it's conflicting to a degree if we're saying that those side streets are not a byproduct of what's going to happen on the corridor.
Yeah, I think that the way that you put the two-phase signals in, the amount of traffic that you're having to make them take a different traffic pattern, you can limit that number. So for instance, we actually looked at the Squire Pope intersection, and if you still allow the left turn onto Squire Pope, then you actually are only making a different traffic pattern for about 1% of the vehicles that enters that intersection. So it's not, you can make those intersections so that the smallest amount of traffic is having to be rerouted or taking a different traffic pattern. At that point, they could get on 278 and make a U-turn at some point and not have to go back into the neighborhoods. However, there was some talk about potentially adding a road going from Squire Pope to where Old Wild Horse and Wild Horse come together, and that would be through a community. And so that case, if that was to be looked into by that community, if that community wanted that, is something that might be better handled on a local level to have the speed limit down, tree coverage, things like that. Also, I know there was some talk a while back, maybe years ago, maybe less, about a road on the south side of 278, connecting 278 to Spanish Wells. Again, that would be through kind of a local area and might be something that the town or county may want to have control over. We did look outside of that as well. One of the intersections that was a concern was Wild Horse and Gumtree. And I believe DOT said they were going to look and see what impacts were going to happen at that intersection based on their intersection concepts.
Okay. My last question is, you define Stony as a traditional cultural property designation area.
Mm-hmm.
For the benefit of the public, can you explain what that means?
Yeah, that's a designation given by the SHPO, the State Historic Preservation Office. Jeff, I know Jeff could probably explain it a little bit better than I can, but do you want to take that?
Sure, and we've got it kind of documented here, Councilman, in the report as well. But if you'd like to take a look at it, really it just makes sure that it's saying the SCDOT and the other agencies have to consider the historic significance of that area as well.
Okay, thank you.
So I guess just to add to that each individual house or building by itself would not be eligible for any historic register, but when you put all of those together into one community, that is what SHPO considers a traditional cultural property.
Okay, understood.
Mm-hmm.
I guess my next question is, he's not there. It's for Mr. Orlando. I'll wait till he gets back. I'll move on if he is coming back.
He's not coming back.
He's not coming back?
No.
Okay, well, I can appreciate the work that has been done by the Oversight Committee and HDR. I'm curious to know how we're going to use this information alongside our efforts with MKSK. I like what you said, Mr. Mayor, that the project is from Moss Creek to Sea Pine Circle, but this report that we have in front of us is very limited. There are some concerns that have been brought up that I think need to still be answered, and I want to be assured that as we move forward with MKSK, that we are expanding the scope, but also answering the questions.
Yeah, I've asked Josh to take notes and talk to Mark when he gets back.
Okay, thank you.
And Alex, I would also follow that up by saying, if you have specific questions or things that you want to have addressed, if you want to go ahead and email them to Mark, we can make sure that we've got that information available.
Okay, well, all of the questions that I asked Philip and Jeffrey are still on my mind. And I'm not criticizing their report. I'm simply saying that to the general public, this is going to smell more like a peer review than anything else. And that's not what we signed up for. But if we're going to dive deeper and have more credibility, then a lot of these questions still have to be answered.
Thank you. Tammy?
So did I miss an email that had the report in it? Because I feel at a disadvantage without having read that, and I'll admit I have not seen.
Tammy, that was in the package of documents I left at your house this past week.
Okay, I did read those. Okay. Sorry, there was a lot of stuff, Krista, that you left, and I appreciated you doing all of that. I guess the question that comes to mind, and I think it goes to some of what Alex was just talking about, is first, I like the recommendation coming from y'all with regard to a maximum 45 mile per hour. I think that, or 35, because as you may or may not know, and following up on Mayor's comment, as you get to the Sea Pine Circle and down that area, the 45 mile an hour speed limit drops to 35. And in my mind, one consistent speed makes sense. And in terms of many of the other obstacles that we have with regard to traffic and on the island, that lower speed limit in my mind, is desirable. One of the things that I just want to pick up on is you mentioned that there was that E level of service. And how is that the E level of service? Is that with the no left turn or the limited left turn, this two phase? Is that where we get to an E level? Okay. I'm seeing a head shake, but I'm not sure if you're standing correctly. Did I get that right?
Yeah, Jeff, do you want to go into that? I know we analyzed the corridor both with 4 lanes and 6 lanes, kind of the existing number of lanes and the 6 lanes with improved intersections. Jeff, do you want to go into that?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of that has already been documented by FCDC and posted, so we do want to try to provide a little more clarity to that. And I think to kind of what Philip was talking about in the presentation as well, the level of service designation can be lost and confusing sometimes. So part of what we're recommending and part of what the oversight committee asked as a charge per se is to talk about more like a travel time. You know, if you're traveling from point X to point Y, how long is that going to take to get cross through the corridor and across through a couple of the traffic signals? So hopefully that'll be a better designation, and that they're going to provide all that at the public meeting. We're told. Public hearing.
We've seen to lost Tammy for. Are there any other questions? Well, Phil and Jeff, I thank you very, very much. To be continued. Thank you all.
Yes, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you, council. Motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second. All in favor, raise your right hand. Thank you very much. Have a great day.